Todd McShay recently talked about it at the time of making this eval, but the best quarterbacks in the NFL either have elite arm talent and or have great rushing ability. Sanders has neither right now, and when you combine his difficulty beating pressure and blitzes and his tendency to trail back in the pocket, it kind of starts to look like a recipe for a disaster. Hey y'all! For this week's video, we'll be doing an in-depth analysis of Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders. I use a lot of different grading methods, which if you want more details on these, you can check out my eval on Cam Ward, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details than that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of quarterbacks from last year for reference, you can check them out with the link in the description. For any new viewers, I'll be trying to cover a quarterback nearly every week leading up to the 2025 NFL Draft, so if you don't want to miss any quarterback evals, be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Sanders. Starting out with his basic stats, including the stats from the games I charted, Sanders' to completion percentage should stand out instantly. At 74% completion percentage, he's up there as one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the draft, and we'll see that later in his charting as it shows that he's accurate with his ball placement as well. It's incredibly impressive for him to complete nearly 75% of his passes on about 500 pass attempts, and you can definitely see that accuracy carrying over to the NFL. Also, if you aren't familiar with how college football calculates rushing yards for quarterbacks, they take away sack yards from rushing totals, so that's why Sanders is in the negatives despite having some scramble ability. He did take a lot of sacks, and that will be an area that he'll need to clean up in the NFL. That is also why you see some great statistical performances against a team like Kansas State, but Colorado still ended up losing. The team's poor defense definitely had a part to play in some of those losses, but the sacks have been a huge factor in a number of Colorado's losses as well. That being said, to be as accurate as Sanders is, and to protect the ball at an okay rate like Sanders does, really gives some hope for him as an NFL starter. Getting into his footwork, it's still not great, but it's actually a lot better than it was last year, and it's pretty good compared to across the class. Though he can bounce in the pocket, he does a good job keeping his feet flat to give himself a good platform when he lands to deliver the throw. His mechanics on the move are also some of the best in the class, and he does a great job resetting his base and getting his toes and bodies aligned with his target to deliver an accurate ball on the move. Although his drop back could be cleaned up, it has good rhythm to it. That being said, it's kind of more of a back pedal right now, and he can bounce in the pocket as I mentioned before as well. Also, his base can fluctuate sometimes in width, and in general I think he's a little bit too over-reliant on his upper body in his throws, which he won't be able to get away with in the NFL with his arm strength. So though there is still room to further refine, the improvements were really good to see, and he ended up earning a B for his footwork. Now, an area that is a huge area improvement for Shedeur Sanders is his pocket presence. Before we get into the negatives, I do just want to highlight some of the positives. Starting out with that, he did a better job stepping up in the pocket this year, which helped reduce the number of sacks he took. That being said, the rest still needs a lot of work. I've seen a number of people boast about Sanders' pocket presence as a strength, and I just simply don't agree. Sanders does have some good improv skills and has slightly reduced his hero ball tendencies, but still falls into the trap of trying to do too much in games. He needs to do a better job knowing where his touchdown or outlet are to be able to survive early pressure and not take huge losses. Speaking of taking losses, some quarterbacks take small losses on sacks, but Sanders will often take huge drive derailing sacks due to his tendency to trail back in the pocket and misread his blocks. This not only compromises protection, but also creates even more difficult throws for him to make, which is even more apparent with his lack of elite arm strength. If you want a clear example of the effect of this, watch Sanders' game against Kansas State. It's the perfect encapsulation where he showed excellent accuracy, but had back-breaking sacks that ended up being a big part of the reason the team lost. There's just too many times when he loses track of the pass rush and he's either too slow releasing the ball to avoid a loss, or just isn't willing to throw the ball away and takes the sack. On top of that, it also creates extra hits that he's taking, and though I do definitely give him credit for his toughness, he needs to avoid some of the big hits that he takes to be able to keep himself upright. Though he can read a defense, I really just want to see him be able to multitask a little bit better and make little movements in the right direction in the pocket, and keeping track of pressure to be able to extend plays without needing heroic efforts. So with a lot of room to still grow to ensure he keeps his offense on the field in the NFL, Sanders ended up earning what will be his lowest grade this entire eval with a D for his pocket presence. Now we can get into a very mixed bag section with one of Sanders' best attributes and one of his most concernings. Starting with his best, his release. Sanders is one of the quickest and most efficient releases in this year's draft, and it pairs very well with his accuracy and ability to make throws at diverse arm angles. He has a fantastic understanding of how to layer throws into coverage and sneak balls into tight windows. Now for the area that I again defer from consensus on is his arm strength. He definitely doesn't have a weak arm, and it should be adequate for the NFL, and though his arm strength isn't a deal breaker for me, it definitely isn't elite or a cannon like I've seen some suggest. This becomes very clear if you watch the velocity of his balls to the opposite side of the field or deep down the field. The ball often flows towards his target, often lacking zip, and will often lead to defenders having more time to make a play on the ball. So again, I don't think it's something where he doesn't have the arm strength to be a starter, but I think it is just a little bit concerning and may potentially limit his upside. So with some questionable arm strength, Sanders ended up scoring a B for me, which still translates to a starter level arm, but also often requires other traits to be there to be a long-term starter. One trait that is often required to compensate for a lack of elite arm strength is a great release, which Sanders definitely has, and he ended up grading out at an A- for me. Moving on to Sanders' playmaking, ball security, and top star potential, he's a good playmaker and should add value to an NFL offense. He's a good improviser and can play out of structure. In structure, he can work through his progressions and is one of the best quarterbacks in his class at reading a defense. His accuracy also gives him a lot of upside, as he also knows how to perfectly place 50-50 balls and how to not only protect his receivers from big hits, but also give them a good ball to get extra yards on the ground after the catch. Also, he is closer to a pure pocket passer than a great scrambler, but he is more of a clay statue than a stone statue in the pocket, meaning that he can still pick up yards and has a little bit of wiggle to him. He doesn't always escape pressure cleanly, but when he does a great job keeping his eyes downfield to drive the ball down to a receiver. Though he can fall into his hero ball tendencies and can make some unnecessary hits, his ability to never give up and lead his team despite getting no help from his defense at times and taking on some big hits to deliver accurate balls downfield is definitely admirable. I think one of the biggest things for me that will always just kind of hold him back, as I mentioned before, is his arm strength. It's, again, not at the level of elite quarterbacks in the NFL, so it just makes me a little bit concerned about him. His accuracy and release will take him far, but it's just hard to make a clear projection of him becoming one of the top quarterbacks in the league with his current arm strength limitations. Todd McShay recently talked about it at the time of making this eval, but the best quarterbacks in the NFL either have elite arm talent and or have great rushing ability. Sanders has neither right now, and when you combine his difficulty beating pressure and blitzes and his tendency to trail back in the pocket, it kind of starts to look like a recipe for a disaster. More often than not, players with those limitations and those key areas of improvements don't often pan out in the NFL. Now, what separates Sanders from those previous players is his great accuracy and ability to read the defense. But if he continues to derail drives in the NFL like he did in college, he may get a short leash in the NFL. On paper, he's a more talented player, but Caleb Williams came in a lot of the same struggles as pressure and blitzes and trailing tendencies, and many people, including myself, were willing to excuse that because of his arm talent and scramble ability. Despite those traits, Caleb Williams has experienced a lot of struggles in the NFL, and I think things could be potentially worse for Sanders, as he doesn't have the arm talent or scramble ability that Caleb Williams has. I still think Sanders could be a solid quarterback, but I think a lot of people really need to start to be honest about his limitations and questionable ceiling. How well he does at compensating for his lack of elite arm strength and at reducing the number of big losses he takes will be important to ensure he doesn't wear out an NFL coaching staff's patience. So Sanders ended up scoring a B- for his playmaking. For his ball security, Sanders ended up with either an interception or fumble on 14 of his 577 dropbacks and rushes, which equaled out to an interception or fumble on every 41.21 pass or rush attempt, which ends up equaling out to a C+ on my scale. For his top starter potential, he ended up with a B-. So we have a lot of his grades in, but let's finally take a look at some charting results. As you can see if you're a visual viewer, Sanders' accuracy is legit, as there's a ton of green on his on-platform passing chart, and this will be one of the most green and clean passing charts we'll see this whole draft cycle. All his areas of intermediate accuracy are at 75%, and his short and medium throw accuracies are all consistently above 80%, with 90% in the left medium, 83.33% in the middle medium, 81.82% in the right medium, 82.35% in the short left, 91.67% in the short middle, and 83.33% in the short right. His deep ball accuracy isn't quite as good due to some arm strength limitations, but still very workable at 50% in the deep left and deep right. So overall, I think this is a very fair label for Sanders to be viewed as one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the draft. His on-platform chart numbers definitely back this up, and his feel for ball placement is just incredible at times. I can easily see that translating to the NFL, and it will be a major asset for him throughout his entire NFL career. Sanders' off-platform accuracy is also really impressive. Unlike most right-handed quarterbacks, his accuracy is actually pretty consistent while on the move to all areas of the field, thanks to his mechanics on the move. He got scores of 50% in the deep left and 100% in the deep right, which is really impressive considering the arm strength limitations. Also, he was at 50% in the intermediate left and 70% in the medium left, which are both about average and solid for right-handed quarterbacks. His right intermediate and right medium were both better, being at 75% and 100% respectively. His short right and middle were both good as well at 80% and 87.5%. The only true blemishes were his medium middle and short right, as both were rather lackluster at 0% and 52.63% respectively. Also, I think the struggles and limited attacks in the middle of the field were more of a showing of his lack of elite arm talent, since he mostly was making throws on the move in the same direction of the field he was moving towards. Now, I will say I do appreciate him understanding his limitations, because there's been way too many quarterbacks who'll try to make ridiculous throws across their body over the middle and just have a terrible interception. So, though he may not be able to make those insane throws and those highlight plays, having a grasp of his limitations and good accuracy in most other areas of the field while on the move is incredibly impressive. Before getting into the supplemental data from the games I charted, I want to highlight Shedeur Sanders' game against Kansas State since I brought it up earlier. So if you aren't a visual viewer, I have Sanders charting results on the screen now, and there's a lot of good from it. Most areas he targeted are green other than the right side of the screen. However, the few areas that aren't green are still in the yellow, showing that he at worst performed at an average level in those areas. This was a really impressive performance for him, despite it coming against one of the highest ranked teams he faced all season. So you'd think he would have come away with a win, right? Well, unfortunately, the team still lost. As I mentioned before, the defense definitely played a role in that loss, but Sanders took 6 sacks in that game, with a number being for huge losses that end up killing promising drives. This is the type of thing that just really makes me worried about him in the NFL. We can see Sanders has incredible accuracy and played lights out from a passing standpoint, but still made key mistakes that contributed to the team losing that game and could cost him future games. Also, there's not a lot to take away from his off-platform passing against Kansas State, but I did want to include it for completion's sake. Overall, he struggled to get the ball downfield and was rather unsuccessful to the right side again and over the middle. The sample is pretty small, so I don't think there's too much to take away from it, other than the fact that when Kansas State did pressure Sanders or put him on the move, he struggled to help his team get a positive gain. Also, this again kind of just showed that he wasn't great at finding his outlet or checkdown options, leading to some big sacks, as we would see more green or at least yellow if he was taking advantage of those opportunities. For Sanders' supplemental data, his accuracy on all sides of the field were incredibly impressive, and all easily in the 70th percentile, with 71.59% for the left side, 79.31% in the middle of the field, 76.27% on the right side of the field, and 75.38% for his total accuracy. That type of accuracy and it being consistent in all sides and areas of the field will make teams very comfortable trusting him at the next level. He was also a lot more consistent with much less way off throws, with just 5 total scores on the throws that were deemed way off target, or essentially not being remotely close to his target. As I mentioned though, he still struggles with taking sacks, with 19 in the games I charted and 42 in the whole season. In the games I charted, he didn't have very many fumbles or deflections at the line, with just 1 fumble and 6 deflections. Now with the matchups I watched, he did do a good job at taking throwaways, but still got himself into trouble with some interceptions, with 7 throwaways but 5 interceptions. Now one of his interceptions in the BYU game wasn't his fault, as it bounced off his receiver's hand into the defender, but it still ended up leading to him having essentially 1 per game even if we remove that. He at least didn't have any dropped interceptions and didn't have too many drops by his receivers, with just 8 drops in 4 games. Unfortunately, one of them could have counted as 10 drops since it bounced off the receiver's hands for the interception in the BYU game like I mentioned, but it is what it is. But with the number of hits that Sanders would take, Colorado didn't have him do too many designed runs, with just 2 total in the 4 games I charted, and Sanders only scrambling 12 times, with a lot of them coming against BYU. The biggest red flag, as I mentioned before, is his success against blitz and pressure. Sanders was successful against blitzes at just a 43.9% rate, and against pressure on 54.46% rate of his opportunities. I understand a lot of people want to blame Colorado's offensive line for this, and there definitely is some truth to this, but there still is a lot of improvement Sanders needs to make as a pocket manager to help his line out as well. So with all that data, Sanders ended up scoring an A- for his short throw accuracy, an A for medium and intermediate throw accuracy, a B- for deep throw accuracy, an A for his throw on the run ability, and a C+ for his success against blitz and pressure. So as a summary of Sanders' strengths, Shedeur Sanders has great ball placement paired with a great release that gives him promise in the NFL. Also, though his rushing numbers look bad, he's a solid scrambler and defenses won't be able to just throw defenders back into coverage against him and will need to account for his legs. He definitely can continue to improve his footwork, but improvements he made this year were really promising, and I'm excited to see how much further they can come with NFL coaching. Finally, he does a great job spreading the ball all around the field and can accurately attack nearly all areas of the field. That's an extremely promising trait and one that typically translates to at least being a capable starter in the NFL. For Shedeur Sanders' weaknesses, his arm strength will be a big question mark for me, and I'm concerned that NFL defenses could take advantage of the extra time the ball hangs in the air. Also, his dropback will need more work to be more of a true dropback and less of a backpedal. Maybe he learned his dropback from Travis Hunter with him playing corner, but it's definitely not going to fly in the NFL. He also needs to continue to limit his hero ball tendencies, as they were often unsuccessful in college and will be even less successful in the NFL. Those tendencies and poor pocket presence led him to have some big losses, especially against blitz and pressure, and could be the number one thing that could cause him to lose a starting job in the future. So by taking the average of all Sanders' grades for his final overall grade, I end up with a grade of 3 out of 4, which equals out to just barely meeting the good starter level per my grading scale. I think it's a very fitting area for Sanders, as he has a lot of tools that could lead him to be a good starter in the NFL. However, he also has a lot of things that could give him high bust potential, like his ball security issues, success against pressure and blitzes, including taking big sacks, and a lack of elite arm strength. Also, if you watch my Cam Ward video, you'll know that I gave Ward a higher grade, so that officially makes Sanders no greater than my QB2 of this class, which does seem to be a bit of a hot take right now. We'll see if that changes come April, but I feel pretty confident in these grades and placements right now. As for a comp, due to both having questionable arm strength and sometimes being a bit slow to react to pressure or blitzes, but having great accuracy, a little bit of scrambling ability, and a quick release, I have Tua Tagovailoa as Sanders' comp. Like Tua, I think Sanders will become what most people consider a disappointment after multiple years of hype. However, similar to Tua, I think he'll still be a capable quarterback for a team and for multiple years, and will be capable of elevating an offense thanks to his accuracy. The big thing for Sanders to make more of a favorable impression than Tua is to minimize the big losses and mistakes he's been making in college. If he does that, then he should get closer to the higher ceiling that some people are currently giving him. And that's all for Shedeur Sanders. Let me know what your thoughts are on the eval and on Sanders. I'm planning to have Carson Beck eval and video out next week. I'll be working to have a quarterback eval most of the weeks leading up to the draft, so to be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the video as it helped the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack, as I'll have the full written eval for each player out at the same time of the video. But thank you all, and see you all next time.